So what are you working on today?
The revised literature review. So I think we had talked about the initial one. So I ended up submitting one, but I didn't feel like it was necessarily that strong, and so I have to revise it.
Did your professor tell you to revise it, or you just want to revise it too?
So it's for the next assignment, so she wanted us to build on it, basically. I think I'm still a little just lost to like what the point of a literature review is in general for English. So there's lots of ways we could go about it. I have like the write-up for the new one, the old one, I have my old assignment, like whatever you want to do.
Where would you go?
I think just like what a literature review is supposed to accomplish, because she's saying like write summaries with transition statements and then tie it in at the end to insight about your research, but like to me that doesn't make any sense. And I know like maybe it would if you understood a literature review, but to me that like just seems nonsensical. So like I'm not sure what I am missing about how that would be helpful, like to do summaries of articles.
Does it seem nonsensical in the sense that once you read an article, it's read, why do I need to summarize it?
Well, just my sense was like you would just pick out what would be relevant for your research, and then you would like analyze that, and then that would be a useful thing to do in general, right?
Can you remind me then what your eventual research is going to be on? So there's going to be a research project at the end.
Yes, yeah. So the whole course, it's a research methods course. So the final thing is we come up with a research proposal for our this 50-page paper that you write to do your master's if you sign up to do that, which I did. So it counts as like a course. So you take this course to help you do this.
Do you know what you'll be doing for this? So it's going to be a 50-page paper.
Yeah, so I have 3 novels I'm doing, and I'm making this new thing called trans-decadence, so taking trans theory and applying it to the decadent period at the end of the Victorian period, like the turn of the century, like 1900 basically area. Yeah.
What year was the other? It was a decadence, but just remind me what actual years are the decadence?
Like my first work is 1870, which is a little early. 1890s were the big height, and then it kind of ended when Oscar Wilde was imprisoned for being gay in like I think 1901.
So that's kind of the end.
Yeah, so it's a very short period, really, and it was known for like people like queerness coming out in writing, like when people were more gender non-normative, more sexually non-normative. So it was a cool period, but then yeah, they got punished for that basically with Wilde because he was a big celebrity, and so then they kind of shut it down.
Yeah. I guess in terms of, so that's broadly what your topic is about.
Yes.
Do you have a particular argument you're going to be making about that topic?
So I want to look at, because I'm looking at, so trans representation in these 3 novels, I wanted specifically to look at allyship, like how in each text there's like another character who kind of has this like back and forth dialogue with the gender non-conforming character, and it helps them kind of navigate the world, and I'm very interested in that.
Character navigate the world. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, in terms of how can we give this literature review some value?
Yes.
Can we get through it?
Yes.
My thought is, as someone coming from outside of your research,
yes.
I want to see evidence from first off, have you read enough about this era to know that this is a relevant topic? I mean, it feels so obvious in the sense that, yes, Oscar Wilde was well known for being gay. You get that kind of query as you see that sort of trans focus coming on. Has anyone else looked at allyship in relation to the non-conforming character, helping them navigate the world? So has there been any other research specifically looking at what you want to examine?
Okay, that's such a great question. I wonder in terms of, because then you have like, I mean, I imagine, I'm really not sure how to find that. And then basically like, everyone is just doing articles on their novels. So now I'm just stuck with this very specific thing, right? Which is like 1 article per novel. And then because there's no trans theory being applied to decadence, I'm just like looking for any article that like has my novel and it has queer themes to help me find trans themes. So I have to be pretty general, unfortunately.
So you're saying you have found no trans theory being applied to decadence?
No, that's why I'm like doing it. That's like the point. Yeah. No, that's why I'm doing the research. But they have applied queer theory. So trans decadence is kind of I made like a specific. It's like a specific way to use queer theory, but also like queer theory is mostly about like like it's about sexuality, like being like a lesbian or gay or non whatever other sexuality, where or like having weird like fetishes, whereas like trans is more about gender. So like that would be like it's like the good use case is you like look at really queer ideas of gender that are really cutting edge, and you like put them back in that context.
Yes. I have a bunch of different questions going on right now, but I think that what you're telling me is that there is some research about queer theory being applied to decadence.
And even like feminism. Feminism also helps. Like those are basically the fields that look at gender, right? And so the articles I'm reading, whether they're using feminism or queer theory or whatever, that's still good. Like I'm gonna use it, right? It's still relevant to me. Yeah.
I think what I'd say then is what you need to do is show where those are helpful, and then where they stop being helpful or where they kind of drop off, and you need to continue on. So I think of it as, all right, queer theory and feminism maybe gets you this far, and that's where your research kicks in. So you're going to say, this is going to help me understand this, but now I need to go further with it and apply it this way.
And it kind of ended up being that way with the first version because, like, basically, their closed readings were kind of bad. Like, from a trans theory perspective, like, they did a good feminist reading or even, like, good queer reading, but I think they totally missed a trans reading, which makes it better. So I did I think that's what was frustrating, too, about just writing the assignment. I was like, well, this is a problem. Like, they should have done this or that, and more or less, like, this would have added something, right? But maybe that was good. Maybe that was the point. It just felt like so clunky. Like the whole thing just felt like so clunky. I don't know how to explain why it felt like a waste of time, but it did. And I wanted to feel like it really pops, and I really like get some insight, and I really like convey something to the professor.
Did you, when you took the literature review and you said you found these problems, did you acknowledge those problems?
Yeah.
In the literature review? You said this is a problem because, or this doesn't.
Yeah, and like this is what they could have done. This is how they take it one step further. Yeah, because it was really annoying. It's annoying to read theory that you don't like.
You were critical.
Yeah, but I said like basically this is a good foundation, and then this is what you can do with it. That's what I did.
That sounds effective.
Okay.
Because to me, that's when I say critical, I don't mean negative.
No, I know.
I mean critical in the sense that you were identifying the strengths of this theory or what this approach is, and then where it goes off and where it needs to be enhanced.
Yeah. So I did do that.
That seems good to me.
Okay.
Again, I know that in your particular research you have 3 novels.
Yes.
It might be hard to find articles specifically on those 3 novels with allyship, but I wonder if there's if you went into other fields as well too, like sociology, for example. If you extend beyond literature, but then bring it back in literature.
And now there's a weird thing where I don't think they would want me to do that. I would be fine doing that. So now for the revised literature review, I can make a bit more of like a meta argument. So like for this one that I have done 2 articles on now, I've now read the second article, right? So I'm going to do 2 articles for each of the works, right? So like for the first version, I read 1 article and they were like, wow, this guy's such a nice ally. But again, there's no place in this review for me to even really talk about allyship because we don't even have an intro. We're like literally supposed to write a summary and then write a transition sentence. So I can't set anything up, right?
Is it possible then that this style of literature review is to be quite neutral at first?
Well, she says like the verb synthesize. So she says though, you just do. She wants the same format, but she says now you're supposed to synthesize ideas, which it'd be nice, like if you can even have like a nice little intro, like paragraph telling anyone why I'm doing it, right? Because that's brutal to not have any signaling, right?
Did you tell me that she indicated that the synthesis comes later in the paper?
Well, she just said the format still is summary, transition sentence, summary, transition sentence, and then at the end, insight. So like, you just couldn't put it anywhere else, really. I would like a through line about allyship, because again, now too, with these 2 articles, like the first article, though I didn't know how to signal, I was looking at allyship because I can't write a sentence anywhere about it until the end of the paper, which even then, it's kind of too late to do anything with it. You can't put it at the end of it, right? Like then you can't.
So allyship wasn't mentioned in the article itself, is that correct?
Well, I basically looked at who I consider the ally, right? So it's a meta argument about him being an ally, but I couldn't really say that because I'm doing a summary. So now in this one, I have like another version of this novel where they're like, wow, he's horrible, he's super heteronormative. The first article was like, oh, he's a great queer ally. This one's like, no, like, fuck it. So it's actually, now this is very interesting, right? Because I can pull out like, okay, so how are they saying the limitations of his allyship in my interpretation, right? Like, he's got some heteronormative hangs up. This is the problem here, but look how he's also really queer in these ways. No, that's super fun, right? That's a fun dialogue. But like, in the format of like summary transition, sentence summary transition, like how am I even supposed to say anything? Like, where would I say that?
I think your suspicion though is right at the end, and you kind of in a sense build an argument based on your interpretation, which I agree. I think is unusual for literature review. The whole description of what you're telling me sounds unusual.
And what's hard though is because I talked to her. She's like the chair of the English department, and I was like, this seems unusual, and she was like, this is not unusual. Like, I'm not sure. So I'm so confused, but whatever. I guess putting that aside,
yeah.
I need to make it usual in a way that she will like, but that also gives me something worth doing, right?
Yeah. I think there is value in it, even though it is slightly unusual. So the fact that you just summarize in a neutral, you don't make any comments, and you save it for the end.
But I think you're supposed to have like some analysis, but then it would be about the article. Like, there's no space from what I understand to have like a meta argument at the beginning where like, hello, like, I am doing a literature review because I'm trying to look at trans allyship, right? Here is an article. Like, if you want a through line of like why you're doing what you're doing, that I feel like is missing, and she doesn't really want it either. Okay. That's what's rough. But then in the end, I guess you just kind of throw it all in there in a mess, but that's not great.
So what you're saying is it'd be nice to have like that kind of framing of making it clear what your argument is.
Yeah.
Versus having the middle part and then reminding it again.
But her big thrust is like, we need to be open-minded and really just be having an objective summary of these articles. So then she doesn't. I think her concern is we, like, as English students, we've been trained to just make conclusions all the time without looking at evidence, which I agree. And I'm also a psychology student, so I understand the value of, like, if you're biased, if you're so biased, every time you look at a piece of data, you're never going to get a good conclusion, right? So she's trying to hold us back, so somehow have these objective summaries, but then have our, like, insight at the end. But it just, at that point, when you have the insight at the end, you couldn't refer to any of the things you did above, because you can't refer back properly. It's not like you can direct quote from there. Like, it's just sad. Like, that's not great.
It's a frustrating process.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's kind of forcing you to think back. Not forcing you to think backwards, but it's almost like forcing you to a mold that doesn't feel comfortable.
Yes, but if I could somehow enjoy what it is giving me, I think that would help. And I'm struggling to understand, like, the benefits to doing it this way. I guess that's... And I want to just submit something that to me feels like a valuable piece of work. Okay, so if you really had to put at the end... So, and another thing I just really wanted to understand from you was, like, if someone came in here and they were like, hi, I need to do a literature review, and maybe they had, like, lost the assignment, like, what would you tell them? Like, can you give me some fundamentals about what a literature review is?
So we had, like, no instructions?
Yeah, just you didn't, yeah.
Do we know what at least a topic?
Your research.
I'm not saying we didn't know a topic. So,
yes.
I would say, well, first off, when you find a topic, what you want to do is you want to prove to me that your perspective on the topic has validity. Because other people haven't examined your particular angle.
Yeah, like a gap in the literature.
Exactly. So it's not just, it doesn't need to come like way out of the blue. It should have some context around it. Other people have looked at this as well too. Here's how you're going to take it a step further.
Yes.
Or step in a different direction.
Yes.
Maybe you're not directly building off it. Maybe your other research is sort of relatable and only provides a sort of tangential information.
For sure.
So to me, that's what the whole value is. It's kind of like your first step into sort of a scholarly conversation with people that, in fact, aren't present in the room.
Yeah.
What you're doing, you're saying to them is, you have good ideas about this, but you haven't considered this.
Okay.
Or we should consider this because of this reason.
Or maybe this has been overlooked, whatever, yeah.
In the case of the decadence novels, you make a very good point. Queer and feminist theory has been applied to them, but not trans, which it seems like almost maybe should say the next logical step in terms of...
Yeah, well, it's nice because trans basically looks at gender as like transitioning between categories. So that's super fun because now as soon as gender becomes ideology, it can just move in all these interesting ways. So for feminism, when it's essentialized to the body, like to the sexed body, then it's very limited, right? Because then you have a female and then it has all these specific, it's really hard to pull apart what a female body means, what a female construct is, like then you end up with biological problems. But as soon as trans just becomes an ideology, you can just move it around, you can move gender around and you can play with it, and it's much more flexible as a tool.
And perhaps if decadence had been allowed to continue, if it hadn't sort of reached this conclusion with Oscar Wilde, perhaps it would have continued to evolve that way, but it seemed to have sort of a bit of a wall.
There was another resurgence too, and that's one of the reasons that with World War II, like that was actually because Germany was actually really ahead of their time with queer stuff, and that's one of the reasons that caused like German like Nazi Germany and like euthanasia and all that stuff. So they really, it was a
cultural opposition.
Yeah, they were really threatened by it. So it's been like slapped down a few times. Yeah.
So it's sort of like this operating there in the works of the decadence, in like German literature, but having to face a lot of cultural opposition. So until we see like the full emergence of it and the embracing of it, it hasn't kind of been back applied. Is that kind of the idea? It was sort of like
well, it's hard to because there is also that's another fun thing about queer and trans is like you do still get some interesting kind of biological essentialism, but not in the same way, because so a trans embodiment means someone who does not associate with the gender that they're born as. So again, now you have embodied people, and there were transgendered people in that period. There was not that word, but I've read like these like literal case studies. So like it's a man, he's like, my whole life I wanted to be a woman, I dressed as a woman, I ran away from home, like I have dreams of having children, right? So you had transgendered people.
Was there a rigorous theory at the time for trans?
This is the time that it came out, like right after where I'm looking. So like the early 19, like between like 19 and 1910, like I think like 1904 maybe was when the transvestite was coined as a term, which is like the early version.
Yes. Now that we have, would you say, like a strong trans theory foundation, what do you think is different? Do we have a better understanding now of these decadent works? Do you feel that, as you said, the queer and feminist theory kind of only went so far? Trans theory, what opens up? Yeah,
so like in the first one that I did the 2 articles for, there's someone who's literally, it's like a woman with a mustache who like wants to be called Theo and like wants to be referred to as a male and dressed as a man. So like this is my strongest version of like they would be trans today, right? Like, but all the literature is like, wow, as a female, and I'm like, so they like are assuming her female position and then making assumptions based on feminism. So this is a huge problem. If they were trans, it doesn't really work well. So that's a big help, right? Because they're just like, oh, like the weirdness of how they're representing their femaleness. And like even like the second article I read the other day, it's like they argue that the male character, who I think is pretty queer as well, can't understand them because they're just switching between feminine and masculine all the time. There's no argument of that in the text. That's literally just like feminist ideology that they've applied from like the 90s. But like that there's no, they just say it. There's no evidence. But that would be that's an early argument about gender that people could make. So you really want to clean that out if you can, because that is projected back in the text just as much as transness is. And with transness, we're trying to at least we're still doing the same thing, where we're trying to be more accurate, right?
Yes. So do you think there's a level of accuracy to it that the trans theory because it opens up and makes accessible?
I mean, that's the argument of the research, I guess. Like, if you fail in the research, it wouldn't.
That's what I was trying to figure out.
I guess that's why I'm doing the research, because I think so.
Yes.
I've yet to really prove it in a very meta sense, because I haven't completed the research in a way that I would feel like I have proved that.
which I already like.
That makes sense, I find. I feel
Yeah.
like that's a sort of, justification, understanding why that needs to go in that direction.
Yeah, they basically translate Gothic literature in the Victorian period, but they basically just said anytime it was a monster, they were like trans, and I didn't like the connection between trans and monster. And that just felt like really also just mean, pejorative way to look at trans people. So I really wanted to look at them from the decadent perspective, which kind of revels in like people who believed that like British society was not evolving but was degenerating kind of into chaos because there was all this new science that was contradictory, and so people didn't really know what to make of anything. So there's a space where they could kind of make up their own meaning, and they just kind of reveled in the confusion. So I feel like that is a nice place to look at trans people because they weren't just treated like monsters.
And so that why decadence as a genre, or like
Yeah, as a cultural phenomenon and as a literary genre, there's a lot of like gender ambiguity and stuff in the writing, yeah, and queer stuff, yeah.
that contrasts with what would be considered a Victorian text with the monsters. Like, is Dracula out of that time period, or Frankenstein?
Frankenstein's a classic. They think like Frankenstein's monster was like a trans person, basically, or a queer person. There's a really famous article, and then actually, yeah, Susan Stryker did this super famous article called where she compares she's transgender, she compares herself to like Frankenstein's monster as like an assemblage of parts, kind of monstrous, nothing really aligned. So that's like super common in literature about trans.
So decadence is quite fresh, and like you said, there's like, should I say to use the word joy in it, sort of a revelry to it?
Yeah, it was like the sarcastic revelry and everything sucked. It was like today when Trump may be elected. It's like we're in that vibe. It's like, well, you just gotta, you gotta live your day. But like everything's sucked.
Campaign anyway.
Yes, it was very much that, and I think that's great. Yeah. And it just, people weren't treated like monsters. Like it was this fun, like, people catered to it. People thought it was cool, edgy, interesting. Like it became like a cultural, like it was like a pop culture phenomenon, right?
Yes.
So that was really cool.
So to some of the literature, you would suggest that decadence is an excellent genre in which to explore trans theory in this era in Victorians, as opposed to, you say, like the Gothic,
Yeah.
Which gives us a much darker and cruel understanding of trans characters.
So I'm already trying to, that's basically the niche that I'm trying to carve out, is I think that work was important, but I think that we also need a version of trans in the Victorian period that we can be proud of.
It was happening, as you said.
Yeah.
We have.
And the allies were super cool. Like this guy in the novel, like he was super chill, and like they would do weird things, like they were like hitting on women and men, and he was like figuring that shit out. Like it was great, honestly. It was like very, even like for today, it was very forward thinking.
And that's an interesting contrast with the trans, with the Gothic, which is very, I think of Frankenstein's creature. It's a very interesting contrast.
Yeah, and in those novels, they were treated with more allyship than even like trans people are today a lot of times. So I think it's really cool because it's like trans genealogy, right? It's giving people a history that they can like associate with. That's not just writing them out of it.
So one thing I feel like you're going in the direction of saying, queer and feminist theory is helpful, but it only goes so far.
Yeah, because all the tools for gender analysis, they're built from those, and I will use them, and that is all super relevant, yes.
And another thing you're saying is decadence is the genre to examine this because we see different perspectives than, say, the trans Gothic.
It's different than Gothic, basically, and then the theory is better, so it's like, I guess both the period is better than Gothic is what I'm transitioning from, and then the theory is better than feminist and queer,
That's what I, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm moving past both of these, yes, because that's what I think needs to be done.
That, I would say, then, could be a focus for the literature review.
I agree.
It's just taking it and kind of squishing it into...
Now, how the fuck do I do that, bro? That's what I'm so confused about.
2 sources per novel?
So now it's going to end up being this big thing with 2 sources per novel, but she wants them condensed. But she also wants direct quotes. Like... How does one actually do that?
How long do you get the sense that the literature, they set a page limit or a word limit?
Yeah, she wanted 1 to 2 pages per summary, but now she wants them condensed, so then it'd be like late. I mean, I emailed her asking, she said she'll tell me on Thursday when I have a meeting with her, so like...
Would you say...
I asked her, like, 50% condensed, no response yet, so I don't really know.
Wait on some need for clarity for
Yeah.
the professor. Do you think 6 pages sounds reasonable for the entire literature review plus the synthesis?
I think it's supposed to end up being like 6 to 8, but there's no way if you use direct quote. She said it doesn't matter if it goes longer, so I'll just go longer.
6 to 8 would say about, let's say 2,000 words.
Yeah, my first one was like longer, like 12 pages.
Do you get the sense then that introduction is not even required, don't involve an introduction to start away with the first summary?
It's more like I'm not allowed.
Not allowed. Okay.
It feels not allowed. I will ask her.
First source, second source, third source, fourth,
Okay, now I'll have
and
6.
6.
And then I would have like 2 per novel. Yes. So then the first 2 would be like one novel, one novel, one novel.
That's, so that, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you summarize this one, let's say you have maybe a page to
Yeah.
half a page to
Yeah,
a page.
that's about right.
Which would be about, let's say, around 200 words, give or take.
Oh, you have a little more. Give me a little more.
250, 300?
Yeah, at least. Yeah, at least.
250, 300.
I read long. I don't get in trouble for it, so it'll be long.
The first thing, if we're thinking about like, okay, how can we just narrow it down so that you have as much room as possible? First sentence, what is the objective of that article? So tell me, without connecting to your own research, just read the article, read the source, and go, okay, here's what the researcher is doing.
Okay.
This is
Yes.
their argument, and this is their methodology.
Yes.
If you can do that in 1 or 2 sentences, that gets us out of the way.
And okay, I think I was good at that at least. So keep doing it like that. Okay.
Yeah. And then what we need to do is expand with evidence. So how do we know that this is what they're focusing on? Because they draw on this, this, and this. At this point, I'd say include 1 or 2 quotes.
Okay.
Limit it. That's my take on it. Is okay? Well, can we just? You could keep adding quotes, but what if you just said I'm going to have a quota for each one?
Yes.
2 key
Okay.
quotes. That's it. Everything
Okay.
else needs to be in your words.
No, some of these are like 25-page articles where like they just got really excited to tell me everything they ever thought about a topic. And sometimes half the paper will be on one thing and half will be on another. Like these are very ugly in terms of like actually summarizing some of them.
Have you ever heard of a reverse outline?
Well, that's what it sounds like. I was gonna say, right? It sounds like because you want me to outline, basically, but I don't know what a reverse outline
Okay,
is.
that's something a little bit different. Now, I'm
Okay.
a little bit old school, so
Yes.
when I read my research, I always print it out. I like having that.
Me too.
on this.
Yeah.
So what I do is I print it out, and then for each page, so, here's the article,
Yeah.
here's another page too. It's usually in columns because it's research, right?
That's not for English, but for normal.
What I do is I go through it and I look at each paragraph, and I write here in fewer than 10 words, put this paragraph.
Okay, cool.
Sometimes I try
Okay.
even like in 3 words.
Yeah, that's fun. Okay.
Methodology, stats, and I just kind of chunk it like all of that
Yeah.
throughout the entire, and then I go back through and I look at my notes. I don't look at here because it's too much information.
Yes, yes.
Sometimes it's like the same information,
Yes.
different ways.
Absolutely.
I look through this and I go, okay, that's useful, that's useful, that's useful, ignore this, ignore this, ignore this, ignore this. And I get selective. So even though some of these points may be interesting, I just ignore them. I just pretend that they don't exist, and I just focus on, this is an idea when I get across, here's an idea when I get across. Everything else, I could mention it in the sense that if my obligation was to then try to capture all of their research.
But that's what I'm confused about, because if it's supposed to be objective, I'm supposed to capture all the research. Like, I don't get it.
I think I would allow myself not to do that. That's how I think I would justify it to myself. I would think that I want to be objective in my language and objective, and that I'm not judging their work.
But I literally went and talked to her, and she was like, no, you got, I was like, they spent 10 pages talking about beauty. Beauty is not relevant to my research. She said, yep, just minimize it. So,
Okay.
yeah, but what a mess to actually construct this thing.
If that's the case, then when
Where
it
do you
comes
put
down-
minimized
When
stuff?
it comes to here,
Yeah.
you're gonna spend. My thought was just to try to get to the objective right away and do it in 1 sentence.
Yeah.
From what you told me, that's not gonna work. So now what you have to do is you have to spend half of that space, maybe 100 words, really describing
Yeah.
what they cover.
Yeah.
Cover this, this,
That's
this,
what I-
this, like a
yeah.
list. Like a list.
Yeah.
And I can see why that'd be so.
It's frustrating.
Because like, I
What's
hate
the
around
point of
this.
that? Like, that cannot be useful, and yet, I'll do it, and I'll see what I get from it.
Maybe it's a way to see if you read it all. I don't know. It seems like at this point in your career, it's like, do they have to really check to see if you read
I'm
it?
not sure. I mean, I think this is her process, and I think it works for her, and I think that's what the thing of it.
Yes.
That's what I would say.
And maybe that's the case. Maybe that's why I feel so unpleasant for you, because
Yes.
like, that's yours. It's not my style.
Yeah.
So in that regards, half 100 words, literally just describing like an inventory. Does that word make sense? Like an inventory of what you're seeing in the
But
article.
I feel like she'll mark me down if I don't go. It'd be almost like you have to do a newspaper article from most interesting and relevant to your research to least. But that is also would be disgusting to read.
In terms of like covering everything in the article.
Yeah, because you certainly wouldn't want to put the boring stuff at the front that you've summarized, but you would really only want to put it at the end, because if things are relevant to your research, you could chunk it in such a way that it like ties to your research. But then in the end, you're just left with like this random crap, right? It doesn't do that.
Do you want to start with like kind of like a statement of what's important that relates to research, and then kind of and also they cover this, and this. So you kind of like just sort of like focus on the important part as a way to start, but then make a little. And by the way, they also do this just to acknowledge that.
I guess you have to.
Yeah.
And I mean, technically, every part of their article would fall under their general thesis, because that's just definitionally.
So this is their objective and this is their method.
Yeah,
To
so I
support
think you
this,
can.
they do these things.
Yeah, but you would just have to list a really general thesis, not regarding the part of the article you're interested in, and then I guess I would argue you should probably still go through your part first, and then just minimize the other stuff. Like.
Would then, and so then here, after you go through the 6 sources, then you get to the synthesis down here, right? Is that the idea?
I mean, but she says that, well, she was kind of waffling, but it sounds like there could be some sort of like analysis at the end of an article, but I'd also like to, if these are pairs of articles, it'd be nice to also do a bit of analysis under a pair, like if they were literally connected.
Do you see each of the pairs as strongly connected? So they're written by different...
Yeah, but they're all in the same novel, so they could scarcely not be, right? Because they're dealing with gender, so I'm looking at novels, or articles that are queer with the novel, so like I'm pretty sure they're like fairly connected.
What if you gave the analysis here at the end of the first one here, specifically just on the first one?
Okay.
And then when you get to the second one, you give an analysis of the second one,
Yeah.
then some comment also making the connection.
I mean, I think I can't write this thing without doing that, because it will be too brain dead for me, so I think it has to be done.
Yeah, does that at least now
Yeah.
feel like it gives it credibility and validity?
Yeah, but where do I put this inventory? Because you can't put at the beginning of just the excess.
Let me think about that.
Yeah,
See?
because it feels bad either place. And if you just distribute it throughout, then you just dilute your points, right? Like, it needs to go somewhere, though.
I wonder, this is going to sound very strange, but I hope I can make this
That's
sound
great. That's perfect. This is what we need.
I wonder if you could almost think of it like a lab report. Have you ever
Okay.
done a lab report?
Yeah, for sure.
So with a lab report, of course you have bigger chunks of information, but if you were to kind of condense it down into, think of it as a paragraph, a lab report has an introduction in which you identify your hypothesis or your thesis,
Yeah.
and then you jump into the material and methods, and then you do your discussion, and then your results.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like psychology does it that way, yeah.
And a lot of times you think discussion is here's the information and the results is your analysis,
Yes,
right?
for sure. Okay.
So I wonder if we can kind of make a sort of, how do I want to say there, an analogy. with
Okay,
this
sure.
And say, the introduction is kind of where you say, here's what the work is about. Here's the researcher's objective. The materials is where you kind of get into sort of like, here's all the things that they cover.
Okay.
Inventories.
Okay.
And the discussion is where, again, you're still being kind of objective in your language and saying, here's what they conclude, or here's what they... And then the results is then when you provide your analysis.
Okay.
So even though we think of a lab report like that search spread across several pages, I'm saying apply it all into like one paragraph here.
Okay. I mean, may as well, because we're covering. This is actually a structure that makes sense based on what she is saying. So whether we like it or not, this actually would fit everything. So that's nice. Okay.
What do you
Sure.
think about that?
I mean, I'm down. Like, I'll do it. It makes more sense than trying to make a summary into a lab report. Like, it's better just make a lab report then, so I at least know.
Source,
Yeah.
like mini lab report.
Yeah,
following instruction.
sure. I'm down. Okay.
It's weird, but it works.
Okay, so then at that point, I'm not really punching up necessarily my themes, but again, that's her big point, is like, don't do that. So where would my analysis how would I differentiate between discussion and results in this?
I guess the discussion, so your thought was that.
As an analogy, yeah.
Yeah, your thought was that you should bring in some results, not results, my apologies.
No, that's fine.
You want to have some analysis at the end of each
Yes.
section.
Yeah.
So that you can then kind of tie it in, right? So in my mind, that's the results. That's where you get kind of connected to your research.
So discussion would end their point, that would be their conclusions.
Exactly.
Okay, so basically the evidence, and again, do I just in the order that it's presented in the article? I think that's what's really killing me, that it's like now I have extraneous evidence, so it's like, where does it go?
I haven't read the articles, I don't know. I know sometimes if I even just think back to ones I've read, sometimes it's a little like hard to like map it out. My thinking is, what if you don't worry about how it's presented in the articles, you just think, here's how I want to do it here. So introduction is to quickly find the objective. Whether that is actually in the article's introduction or not, it doesn't matter. Sometimes you don't understand the whole purpose or the whole research until you get to the end.
Yeah.
So you're in essentially, you have to read the whole article, understand the objective, paraphrase it, okay, this is what they're all about.
Okay.
And then you kind of, materials is sort of like, if it gets kind of meandering in terms of how they present their evidence, that's okay. The materials is sort of meant to be the time where you can just sort of kind of gather it all up and say, here's everything that they looked at. Okay? The discussion is when you kind of start to objectively still, but kind of synthesize it. Because I think that was one of the key words you said, Professor, is what's the connection between everything that they say here. You know, you mentioned how one article mentioned beauty, and you go like, that's not irrelevant at all to me. How is it relevant for them?
Okay.
You know? So it's not a synthesis that's beneficial for you.
Okay.
You're showing like, I know how to understand what they are saying.
Okay, that makes sense. So then the one thing that I think maybe is weird for an English article is like, each of these articles will have at least either distributed throughout, or one of the articles I wrote on last week, I basically want a lot of historical context on the theme of teaching in decadent literature, because I thought it really applied to one of the novels and I wanted to understand it. But so you end up with a work that is 80% about novel, or about teaching in the decadent period, and like 2 pages about my novel. But to me, anytime there's a close reading of my novel in an article I chose, I would like to highlight that, right? Because that's like really good info for research. So how would I like...
Are there parallels between teaching and allyship? I know it's very different in the sense that teaching is not...
Yeah, that's my point, bro, but I'm not allowed to make it. But yeah, that would be my point. Could I make it?
The professor told you you're not allowed to?
Well, no, I just have to... So, okay, so I make it after the point. No, I mean, that was why I chose the article.
To me, it's parallels. It's not like you're saying like this article is saying this. It's like teaching is somewhat similar in values or structure or understanding to how we
well, and they're talking about this dyad, like these 2 people, and then like my argument is the other person is an ally, and then the article is talking about the interplay between them, how they're teaching each other. So it's like literally the same. Yeah, that's why I sorted it.
An ally teach someone else?
Yeah, that was my point. But it felt like there's nowhere I'm allowed to signal or explore any of that, which is what's super frustrating.
Unless we have room in either the results.
Yeah, I'm just going to have to do it. So it just has to be not front-ended. It just has to all be back-ended. Like, that's the difference. Okay. But I have to get in there because, my God, like, it's too boring to do without any insight added, right?
That's okay.
As long as you feel like there's room for that, I'd say go for it. I do think that a literature review doesn't have much purpose unless you are making a connection to your own research and having that sort of understanding. Otherwise, you have really more like an annotated bibliography.
That's why it's like weird though, because like even if I'm just like, hey, this is allyship, there's been no sentence cueing people into the fact I'm sorting for allyship. Like it's a weird thing, because then I'll just have random sentences that just now talk about allyship, but with no introduction, I cannot even say allyship was ever important. So now I'm just interjecting allyship into it.
It might come across that, like it might read that way. But I do feel that this is meant to be preparation for your research project.
Okay.
So your audience is a highly selective audience who is aware that this is your goal and that you're doing this whole preparation for that. You're not writing for a general audience. Who's going like, hang on, why are you talking about this? You're writing for someone who's evaluating your readiness for your research.
Okay.
So I think that's why I feel like, okay, we have to allow some differences in terms of how we write for this context versus how you would write for someone else.
So I think what I'll do when I see her on Thursday is I will argue for an intro sentence, and I will argue for having at least a couple sentences of meta argument for my research, because from the first one, I ended up just assuming I'm not even allowed to say anything about allyship, because that could never be an analysis of the article, because the article was never written about allyship. Like, I can't actually, conclude that.
No, and that's why maybe this is why you have to make the argument, it's not written about allyship, but it can be applied to or extended into this field.
Which would be a point of doing a literature review, like you said.
Makes sense. This idea of, no, it didn't exist. This is why your research has validity. It's taking what's out there and then showing how it can also be applied in this direction.
Okay,
Does
cool.
that sound?
Because now it sounds like something worth doing, right?
Well, your time is valuable, right?
Yeah.
You feel like you're doing something with it, and that's
Exactly. Okay. And then what would end up at the end? Now I think we're definitely over time. In one sense,
We'll have to wrap up.
yeah. How can I distinguish the end of this whole thing, where now apparently all of this insight is supposed to spawn organically from the 6 articles?
So down here at the
Yeah.
So some of it might seem a little kind of bit of an overlap then, in terms of if you have some results here, there might be some overlap. So what I'm thinking is you're kind of emphasizing again, here's where we need to take the researcher. When I say we, I mean you. I need to take
You can help.
I need to take the researcher in this direction.
Yeah.
Because here, what did I say with the theory and we need to take the research in this direction, because the theory needs to continue from the queer and the feminist. We have to move beyond that, and we have to move beyond in terms of the genre. We have to explore in this genre to get a better understanding of the trans theory or trans experience in this time period.
And now I'm not sure, well, this is not a worthy conversation though, but there's nothing to show that you should transition from Gothic and Decadent here. I've argued it in my research proposal, but these are Imperial Gothic. Oh god. These are technically also kind of Gothic literature, but there's no monsters, and the trans people are monsters. So in fact, it's true the literature I've chosen does add to, because it's Gothic, but the monsters are not the trans people.
Is it also that we, just wondering if the dominant perspective of trans in this era is trans Gothic? So is there more awareness about the monsters, and that's why we need to see this, because we need to see a different angle to this that is quite different, that's meant to contrast.
From what I understand about trans Gothic, just the idea is monsters in Victorian Gothic just represented everything abject and everything that you would put aside, everything that would hide in the shadow, and so queerness, transness, but then Decadent now celebrates the weirdness,
even
right?
though, as you say, it was, would you say, underground?
Yeah, so instead of it being unconscious, now it's conscious and people are cool with it, which is super interesting.
So it's still, I don't know, in this era, is it still different from an other, but in a totally different, like you said, celebratory way? That's, we need to, it'd be the difference between, if we use again the Gothic phenomenon, they have seen something in the darkness going, oh my goodness, it's scary, and you turn the lights on and go, oh, it's actually kind of great, My own mental analogy, it's if Frankenstein's monster is the person outside looking at this family wishing they could come in, it's if you invite them in for tea, right? That's what decadent literature is for trans people, and it's so nice, right? Yeah, so that to me is what's maybe doing down here, kind of bigger context, that's sort of let's step apart and see the big picture, because it's not just decadence. Decadence is occurring at the same time. But I don't have anything Gothic to argue for. Anyway, I don't know from the constraints of this, based on now what my evidence is stuck being, that I can do that, but I'll see what I can do. I can definitely argue about feminist to queer to trans. That is what actually I've sorted for, right? Yeah. So if that's the case, I don't want to... But that's okay. That's fine though, right? Okay, so... Do you want to give that a shot then and see? Yeah, that will work, and I mean... The very worst case scenario in which I can not write any of my analysis anywhere that I want it, I will just scrape it all and put it at the bottom, or I will just write it and then I will just delete it and submit it without it for her. If it really comes to that, I needed to make the sanity of this thing for myself to write it. That's, in other words, packaging it the way that they want. But I'll do the work that will actually give me any sort of reason to do it, because I can't do it without that. I'm an academic, bro. I sit in my room and I want to make sense of this, and I'm going to do that whether anyone tells me to or not, right? Good. So does
Okay.
that feel like a way?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank you for going through all the angst with me because it's so frustrating.
Right, it is an angsty
Because
process.
it just didn't feel like this is the thing that needed to be that. You know what I mean?
Well, if we go into a good place from now,
Yes,
we'll let you work
awesome.
on it and see how things
And do you
go.
mind if I take your notes? Is that okay?
want all these?
Yes,
Take them.
absolutely.
Apologies, my
No,
writing is
this is how I write notes. I will not be alarmed by the notes.
Oh, very, very kind, thank you.